You're watching an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company.
What's up, Mob Associates? Jimmy Naples here. Johnny Chechitelli. Yvette Laboy is here. We've got an exciting show for you today. Yvette, welcome.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be here. First of all, I am a huge fan. I am the number one fan of you guys. So
thank you.
I'm taking it. All right. So excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. My cup runneth over.
So, let's tell the folks first. How did you find us? How did you even stumble upon the Youngstown Mob stuff?
Sure. I'm born and raised here in Youngstown, Ohio. So this is where I'm from. That makes me even more fascinating. A friend of mine told me I've always been interested in mobsters and that, big fan of never watched The Sopranos, believe it or not, but I guess I don't have to now. I just was always a fan of the mobster stories. So someone's like, you need to listen to Crooked City. So I did, and my mind is completely blown. And not only that, I think it just it sparked something in me, because it's like you guys are saying in your past, it's your history, and it's amazing. I'm like, if you're going to research anything, I mean, this is better than fiction.
It is. I kind of envy you a little bit that you get to go through all that, right? I've been doing this for about 20 years, researching this stuff, and it was so exciting. Once the more you start learning, you think, wow, you come across one or two or three crazy stories, and you think, oh, those were crazy stories, and then you realize it's just the tip of the iceberg, and then it just keeps going and going and going for decades and decades and decades in Youngstown's history. So I kind of envy that you're just kind of starting the journey now. I'm at this place now where I feel so far down the road. I'm waiting for other people to catch up.
Right.
I totally get that, and that makes I'm happy that I was talking to you a little bit earlier, and I feel like I'm at that generation where where Crooked City starts, or where the steel mills closed, and they say Black Monday is in 1977, correct? I was born after that, not long after. Don't ask me how old I am. I'll tell you how much I weigh. But anyways, don't ask me how old I am. But I'm not old enough to remember that. So it's far enough away where when I talk about my life and childhood and growing up in Youngstown, I don't have any mob stories. Okay, so but to know that my parents had these mobs, to know that all this happened in my lifetime, right here on the streets, it's fascinating. And if you guys are not listening, you are way behind. You need to listen. Check it out. Like I said, check out their podcast. I've been watching everything. It's like when how you build something up and you're like, I don't want to build this up because it's going to suck. I can build this up as much as I want, because if you're not into it, then who cares? Because then obviously you're the wrong audience, because I listen to this over and over again. And every single time I listen to it, something else just, I don't know, something else just blows my mind.
You learn something new every time, right? It's like you can just constantly either listening to the podcasts, the Crooked City, the Youngstown Mob Talk, the Vice Squad, you can learn something new on a rewatch or a re-listen that you didn't really pick up the first time, and you think, oh my God, I missed that. But that's even crazier than this other stuff. So there's so many of those little hidden things. You mentioned the same thing, right? With you're not old enough to remember the Black Monday, the closing of the steel mills. Neither am I, but my father was one of those steel workers who was laid off. And when I made the documentary Youngstown Still Standing, I'd cut it together and I showed him a rough cut. And there was a scene where the steel workers were picketing, and they were angry outside the U.S. Steel headquarters. And some of them threw bricks in the windows, and they were marching, around the building. And my dad said, hey, there's me and your uncle. And
I had no idea.
I said, what do you mean? And we went back and we paused by the frame, and my dad, my great uncle, walked right past the camera, and he was in his 20s at that point. I had no idea when I edited that was him. It was crazy, and it was just that connection, And that's not even a mob story. That's just the steel mills closing. But like you said, there's so much you'll learn.
Which is a connection, though, because it's a connection to the heart of the whole story.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
what I think is the most important thing is, and what I'm finding really that's resonating in me is like, I went to the steel mills and I try to put myself into that place. And just to think, like, I think this story is more than about mobsters. The story of Youngstown is about the heart of the city and the people that lost their jobs in the steel mills. And then you can understand, like, I was in tears because I was just thinking, like, imagine losing your job like that and how that must have been. And then you don't have a lot of choices. So you could see where the mob comes in, and I don't necessarily feel like the mob bad. I guess we'll talk about that later. We all have our opinions. Like, I might, some people might think the government is bad. And that brings us to Jim Trafficant, right? Who was able to sit in between those two places where is the government bad or the mob's bad? I don't know, but we're just the middle Youngstown people, and that's who he was, right? I don't know.
He was definitely the through line for Crooked City. He was he telling his story in the beginning and tying it at the end was, these bookends for us that we were able to kind of structure that show around, those two bookends, using Jim Trafficant at the beginning, using it at the end. And he was there throughout. He was a constant, whether he was sheriff or congressman, or, even at the end when he was expelled, he was constantly there throughout. And one thing you touched on, you said that, you weren't the era of the steel mills in the 70s, let's say, was before your time. But, we did live through the end of the mob. The 90s, they were in power well into the late 90s.
That's nuts. That's what's crazy. You guys have to understand this. All right. So when I was like hanging tough, somebody was hanging really tough somewhere. Someone was actually hanging somewhere in Youngstown, Ohio, which is nuts. Not only Youngstown. Okay. So this is also what I think, like, my audience, like most of my audience that are into this with me come off of Twitter. What's up, Browns? Hi, guys. I know you're here. Go Browns. Anyways, it's not just Youngstown, it's the surrounding counties. It's Cleveland, it's Pittsburgh, it's this whole NEO that I like to call it. That has this huge mob. And like when you think of mob, people like New York, Chicago. But whoa, hold on. I say that to buckle up, people.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because, if Johnny and I, we've gone back into the history, and in the 50s and 60s, my family had a lot of ties to Chicago and guys in Detroit and guys in Buffalo. So, these guys did have reach. It wasn't just like they were in, they were in the Youngstown area, but they could reach out to guys in Chicago, guys in Detroit, guys in Kansas City, and they could make moves and do these things and get things done because it was like networking. Just like we have social networking today, this was mafia networking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had families all across the country. Your Western families, like in California and things like that, they reported to Chicago. Cleveland and Pittsburgh reported to the commission in New York. So those kind of they had a system for the way that they did things, right? And so, if you look at most of these cities have died off. Milwaukee's pretty much gone. There's still a presence in Chicago. Kansas City's pretty much gone. New Orleans, from what I understand, is pretty much gone. So a lot of these towns, if you're not a Five Families or like Philadelphia or Chicago or even Detroit, the rest of them have kind of dissipated because they didn't make new members. Members would die, members would get incarcerated. So these other families kind of fell by the wayside. And that's kind of what we saw with Cleveland and Pittsburgh as well. They just, for whatever reason, the leaders didn't make any new members, in the 70s and the 80s. There was a few in the 80s in Pittsburgh, but like Cleveland, there was like barely any. And just having the ranks decimated by prosecutions and deaths and things like that, it's kind of reduced what they are today.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that they did back in the day are all now legal. You know, gambling, that's their big one.
But who's making the money now? The government.
Right.
The government.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before
Yes.
on this
Yeah.
show. Don't get me started. We go into, you want to look at the mob. Everybody says the mob's still around. Is the mob still around? Yeah, they're taking the taxes out of your check, right? That's the mob has become, the government has become the mob. They
Yeah.
took all the rackets and
Yeah.
they made them legitimate, right? And they're the ones taking the cut now. So, I don't want to get too political into this stuff. It's a sad situation.
Now, don't get me wrong. There's still a few associates here in town that, run small time, gambling and things like that and pull small time scams, but there's no made guys.
Mhm.
Let's make sure everybody knows that there's no made guys left in Youngstown.
Yeah.
Everybody here are just associates, guys that used to work with these guys. Same with Pittsburgh. I don't think there's anybody left in Pittsburgh that's made. From my knowledge, from the knowledge that we have, there's nobody left in Pittsburgh that's made. Cleveland, there might be one, maybe two. I know Carmine Agnello, who was married to John Gotti's daughter. I know he relocated to Cleveland.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's.
And that's actually kind of, I think some of the story is people relocating now in,
Yeah.
coming in and taking these old territories.
Yeah.
So if you see things in the future, I think that's what it'll be. It'll be people that have come in to these older territories and kind of restarted
Right.
operations, or tried to at least. So.
But it's so difficult now. I mean, because, trying to pay off a politician or trying to pay off a judge.
Yeah.
I refer to it as everybody's a camera.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything, everyone and everything is a camera. Right. Basically.
We discussed it kind of like with Emil Denzio, the master burglar that we did the show with. The stuff that he was doing nowadays, you can't get away with, right? Just the security systems are more, there's so much surveillance now.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, everybody is a camera. Everybody has a camera, whether there's their phone, but also your doorbell's got a camera. Everybody's filming somewhere. So it's very hard to get away with any of that stuff today. Absolutely. So the crimes now, you would think, are more the white collar, the more business type, corporate type level crimes, right?
Trying
the
to,
ones that
laundering money and
not so much
shell
the
corporations, those types of things.
Exactly. Not so much the street violence, of the older days.
Yeah.
So, but Yvette, you host a show, Bougie Sports.
Yeah.
Tell us about that real quick.
Sure. One thing I'm a huge Cleveland sports fan. I'm a fan of a lot of things, but I love fashion as well. So I'm always about being your authentic self. And I think when people think about a sports fan, they don't think about a girly girl like wearing heels. And so that's why I call myself Bougie Sports, because I'm an extra. I mean, look at me now. I'm talking about the mob. I have lots of different things, you know what I mean? But, speaking of, Jim Trafficant was a football player. So
Absolutely.
Everything ties. And you were saying something earlier too about, I think it's funny because, what is it, 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? I think everyone that lives in Youngstown, Ohio probably has a mob rep somewhere. It's like, you're 7 degrees, if you're around this area, somebody had to know somebody who knows somebody.
When I the one I always bring up is, when I premiered Youngstown Still Standing, the documentary, we premiered at the Butler Art Institute in 2010. And we had a private, premiere party. And I brought my grandmother, and she was still alive at the time. She was there in attendance. And I'll never forget, it was kind of a quiet moment in the documentary, but Sandy Naples popped up, Jim's great uncle. And I hear my grandma go, "That's Sandy Naples." Like, she recognized him, So you're right. I mean, everybody had some kind of connection or some, such a small town. That's what it is. Youngstown is not New York, right? It's not a big city by any stretch. So when you have guys that come in that are operating in town, they're kind of known. And some of these guys were flashy. Sandy was a flashy guy. Vince De Niro was kind of a flashy guy. When those guys come in, people knew Charlie Carabia. You heard Gerald Dickey on Crooked City mention, he recognized Charlie Carabia come in. A lot of these guys in a small town like this, they stood out. They were big fish in a small pond. So,
I mean, can you imagine? I like just listening to that. Like, I try to close my eyes. I'm like, oh, I could just see them all sitting there. I've just put myself into that. I'm like, God, I wish I'd like to be a fly on the wall and watch all that, but maybe I can when you guys come out with your movies or books. Because I know
There
it
you
doesn't
go.
happen because this is better than a movie, but that's crazy.
Yeah,
Like-
we're working on stuff right now.
It's just amazing. I just can't get over it.
Johnny and I we're trying to figure out how to clone ourselves so we can get more done.
Oh yeah, not enough time. That's the one enemy we have right
Yeah.
now is time in the day. But definitely stick with us if you guys are listening to us right now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, anything like that. Don't forget you can find us on YouTube with video. You want to check out Yvette. Come on, you want to see what the behind the voice here. Check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Amazing Podcast Company. Of course, we're everywhere. You can find amazing podcasts to listen audio wise. We've got a Youngstown Mob Tour app coming out soon. It's got over 150 spots that you'll be able to check out, turn-by-turn directions to in Youngstown. Take your own Youngstown Mob Tour. As Jim mentioned, we kind of talked about in our last episode, we're working with a publisher now. We've got some books we're working on. And as a filmmaker, it's always been my dream to tell the Youngstown Mob story in a movie. And we're getting started on that now. The early stages. We're gonna tell you guys in our Youngstown Mob group and all of our podcast fans how you can be involved in that in the future as we get a little further along. So you want to help us make that Youngstown Mob movie the true story too. We're not going to tell some fictional story. It's not going to be some Hollywood knockoff, rip
It
off.
doesn't have to be.
No,
If
it
that's
doesn't.
what makes it, it doesn't have to be.
Exactly.
Why don't make this up?
You don't
You
need
can't make it up.
exactly. It's not. You watch some of these Hollywood versions. They always change things for whatever agenda they have. The Hollywood agenda might change a character into a different race sometimes, or they'll make this guy into a woman because they figure they need a woman in the story here. It's like, you don't need to change the story to make it a great story in Youngstown's case because there are so many. We're gonna pinpoint and start with one truly amazing story. We'll get into all that in a future date, and we'll tell you guys how you can be involved and how you can help us make that movie. In the meantime, we just shot a documentary, Jim.
Yeah,
about the Cav bomb case, the Cavallero bombing.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I just talked to Cecil the other day.
He's the FBI agent, Yvette, that the last living FBI agent who worked that Cavallero case.
So I've been digging, and I don't know, some people might know, but recently we had they had a dump on the FBI vault on my Uncle Joey. They released a new 72 pages out of 267. And so there was a couple cases. He was under 3 investigations at the time he died. And so I submitted FOIA requests to the FBI for the case files for each of those individual investigations. And of course, they sent me a thing. Well, we can't give this to you because it might reveal how we run our operations. So I, of course, had to go in and appeal. So I called Cecil up and said, Cecil, how do I get around this? Give me some, can you give me some help? And he had some good advice for me. So I took that and I appealed it. So hopefully we'll get some information out of that case. Knock on wood.
Yeah, hopefully. Now, Yvette, you mentioned that the first thing that kind of caught your eye or your attention was the Crooked City podcast, right? So how'd you find that? Did anybody recommend it? How did you find it?
I think it was my friend Vince Guerrero who actually recommended the podcast to me.
Our friend.
Yeah.
Our friend.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and in mob parlance,
It's
you
a
would say
small world after-
Vince is a friend of ours.
Oh, okay. He's a friend of ours.
That means he's connected.
Would we give him a nickname though?
Yeah, I don't know. We got to figure it out.
Nickname.
Vince, we're gonna
Yeah.
work on that for you.
Yeah.
But so you came on to Crooked City. You became a fan of the show. Do you have a favorite episode?
I this is so funny because I'm trying to think of what my favorite episode would be. But there's so many moments like when you're talking about, which is hilarious. I hate to go back to this, but this is how great that this story is, that you have to make a documentary. We're talking about one episode's going to a whole nother documentary. This is why I can't do one podcast, people. Like, this is what I mean. There's too much.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm going to go with Dave versus Goliath, because I feel like that's the heart of the whole entire podcast. Youngstown person taking on the mob, it's playing in between. the black and white in between. I think that's and Jim Trafficant is a charismatic character. And he, like you said, he centrally plays through a whole entire thing. Like his stories kind of intertwines. It's not the whole story, but it's some of the story. There's just like, I think it's crazy that you're related to, So I'm actually, even though you're from Pittsburgh, I think this is weird. This might be a weird question.
Okay.
Did anything have to do with your allegiance to a football team? Does it have anything to do with the Mob allegiance? Like, could you be part of the Pittsburgh Mob family and be a Cleveland Brown fan?
All right.
Or vice versa?
So, all right.
That's a good question.
First, let me give you background. So our family's originally from Youngstown. Transplanted from Youngstown. 1905, 1906 is when my family immigrated from Italy to here. And of course, they all grew up here in Youngstown. And my uncle, of course, was a made member of the Pittsburgh Mob. I will admit this. When I was younger, I went to Boardman High School. So I was a huge fan of Bernie Kosar. I know Bernie's family real well. My uncle on my mother's side actually went to school with his dad. And I've met Bernie a handful of times. We used to actually sell office furniture. So we sold office furniture to Bernie's company when he was located in Boardman. So we actually delivered like conference tables and stuff there. And the funny thing is when we got there, he asked me, he goes, well, who's your favorite team? I said, well, my favorite player is you, but my favorite team is the Steelers. And so he went and brought me a Steelers hoodie.
Oh,
because he had this this closet and it had like hoodies of like from every different team. And he's like, even though you're a Steelers fan, but I've just, I've always liked the Steelers. And to me, the Steelers equate more to Youngstown than the Browns do. Right. I mean, you go to the steel mills and that hardworking grindstone.
Earmuffs.
They just go together. They really do. If you think about it,
if you can't be from Youngstown and not be a Bernie Kosar fan, right? So
I mean,
everybody's a Bernie fan. Now, I'll say this: I grew up staying out of that fight. Right? I didn't really follow the Browns or the Steelers, and I'm one of those outsiders where, I almost lean more towards the 49ers in town. When it came to growing up in Youngstown in elementary school, middle school, I got my starter jacket on, right? I went and I picked out the 49ers starter jacket. So you can find some pictures of me as a kid with the Niners jacket. And of course, we know the Youngstown connection to the Niners. They're owned by the DeBartolo family, right? So everywhere, that's what people don't realize is when you were a kid, you could go to like JCPenney's or something in town and they would sell Browns gear, they would sell Steelers gear, and then they would sell 49ers gear. So, not being a Browns fan, not being a Steelers fan, I rock the 49ers gear. I'm not going to lie.
And they're still technically headquartered here in Youngstown.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because if you go over to the DeBartolo building there, right across from Southwoods, you'll see that 49ers logo over there.
Now, one thing we will do here is, of course, this is Youngstown, so we're going to talk a little trash, right? About your football teams, okay?
Yeah.
I don't care. This year, your Steelers didn't, they were okay. They were...
Dude, they sucked ass. Let's be honest.
So, but here's what the Browns have, right? And why maybe they're more of a Youngstown team. I'll say this. Youngstown's been kicked in the crotch to stabbed in the crotch, if you want to take a Jim Trafficant term. Youngstown's been beaten up. Youngstown's been, just stepped on, always kind of the bottom of the shoe. What other team is that in football than the Cleveland Browns? Let's be real.
The mistake by the lake.
Yeah. Yes. And that brings us to another mobster. See, mobs on my mind. Danny Green.
Yeah, Danny Green.
Is Danny Green in Youngstown for anything?
He definitely had ties to Youngstown.
He had a girlfriend down here.
Well, did they have that in the Killed It in the movie?
Yeah,
his girlfriend from Youngstown.
He did have a girlfriend. I think she kind of moved back and forth between the Cleveland area and here.
One of the guys he had killed was they dumped him in Austintown. They dumped him at the right by that Wendy's in Austintown on 46. There's a hotel back there. When that hotel, I believe, was under construction, they found a body in there, and it was from that one of Danny Green's guys that he had whacked.
But didn't the Karabia brothers whack him? didn't from people from Youngstown whack him allegedly? Is that what we say on the mob?
Ronnie Carabia was convicted in that hit on Danny Green, Ronnie and Ray Ferrito. So yes, there was a Youngstown connection with the Youngstown tune-up that killed Danny Green. Absolutely.
And then that all would actually eventually end up leading into the Naples Carabia War here in Youngstown in the 80s.
Well, let me ask you guys a question. If you, in the 80s, would you have driven anywhere? I would have never gotten a car. I would be like, you know what? No, thanks. I'll walk. I would be like, oh, no, thank you.
Even before the 80s, I mean, the real scary decade was the beginning of the 60s. That was when Youngstown got the Youngstown tune-up moniker and the jokes, the real gallows humor of, you know, a barber would cut your hair for $2, he'd start your car for $3.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really from the 60s. There were car bombings in the 70s, and you know, in the 80s, I mean, we talk about, you know, Joe DeRosa's dad getting killed in his car, moving his son's car. It was a dangerous time. Dangerous time. If you were in that life, you know, all the way up through, let's say, the 90s, you know, it was dangerous. And that's the mob movie cliches are true to degrees, right? Of, you know, that's the life they chose, and live by the gun, die by the gun, those kind of things. That happened. That happened in Youngstown for sure.
Which I never knew. I just thought this stuff was made in movies, believe it or not.
Well, most people, I can see that. You know, I can see most people, you know, younger generations coming up and not really understanding that it's real. I mean, I didn't get it. We talked a little bit about this off camera, but you know, you mentioned you never watched The Sopranos. I did watch The Sopranos. That's when I first started becoming aware of it as a young man, right? As a high school student, watching Sopranos with my dad, and then all of a sudden, you look at the news and it's same stuff, and then all of a sudden they're mentioning Youngstown on The Sopranos. So
well, that's like, you know, as a kid, I was always kept away from the news, you know, and part of that was probably because, you know, my family didn't want me seeing that. Same with my dad; he was kind of kept away from it because my grandfather didn't want him, you know, associating with those people. But I joke with my wife. I tell her all the time. I said, you know, if I'd have been born about 10 or 15 years earlier, we probably wouldn't have met, because I would either be in prison or dead.
Who knows?
I would have tried to get into that life.
Charlie Cavallero, you know, he told us one of the things that he thinks about a lot is if that bombing never happened that day where he and his brother were killed. Say they just killed his father by himself.
Right.
If he and his brothers, you know, survived unharmed, they may have grown up in that life.
Right.
They may have grown up to avenge their father. They may have grown up and what went into that life. So yeah, it's, you never know. I mean, there's one path, you know, one small change can put somebody on a different path and can change their history.
Absolutely.
Especially in a town like this, which the thing that people don't understand is the level of corruption. We talk about it as a smaller town. It was easier to kind of corrupt.
Right.
And the level, it was corrupt for decades, for almost the better part of a whole century, you know, that the mob was able to flourish because of crooked politicians.
It was our own little Wild West in the Midwest.
Yeah, and crooked government officials.
Right.
And just the public appetite for gambling. All of these things tied into, you know, Youngstown becoming crime town.
Well, you have to look at it this way too, Johnny, right? So we had the steel mills that were just, you know, they were bustling, you know, people had jobs, 150,000 people in the city of Youngstown, right? And these people most of them were immigrants. They viewed gambling as a harmless vice, something for more of entertainment value, right? And don't get me wrong, you had your degenerate gamblers that would lose houses and cars and, you know, end up getting killed because they didn't pay their gambling debts and things like that. That was a smaller percentage of the gambler, right? And so, you know, they didn't see these things as being bad. But then you had, you know, these mobsters, and everybody knew everybody. Like you say, it's a small town, right?
Yeah.
So if I need to pay off this judge, well, guess what? My buddy down the block grew up with him and went to school with him. So I'll call him up and I'll go through him and he'll get it done because they're friends. Yeah. You know, and that's kind of the way it worked. You always had that go between.
You said something like you're saying that you're like, there's a fine line, like that could almost happen to you. But when you were seeing that, I was putting myself back there and thinking, well, what would have been the difference? You could either went other route. You wanted to be a police officer because that's a much better life or being a much honest person.
Well-
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it was actually that bad to want it. If I was a kid and I seen that growing up, I don't know.
Well, you know, I'll put it this way. So I did some things that I wasn't proud of back when I was younger because I wanted to be in that life. And I'm talking things that I did when I was in like end of middle school, beginning of high school, and through high school, and a little bit after high school. Because growing up, I wanted to be like my Uncle Joey. You know, I wanted to be in that life because you see it as, you see the flash, you see the money. They don't have to answer to anybody, right? Everybody shows them respect. It's those things that kind of drew me to it. Okay. But then when you sit and you look at it and you think about it, right? You know, my grandfather and my Uncle Joey had to bury 2 of their brothers. My grandfather had to bury all 3 of his brothers. You know, how do you reconcile that lifestyle with having to watch all your brothers get murdered?
Well,
Right.
it kind of goes down to what Francis Danny said, the root of everything, greed,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of what led to, I mean, if you think about it, that's really what led to Sandy's murder and Joey's murder for the most part was greed. Sandy's was because he didn't want to kick up to, the bosses in Youngstown. So they decided to kill him. Joey's, I'm
In
most
Cleveland,
likely
yeah.
going to say that was probably because somebody wanted to take his position.
Could
And
that be
and,
Lenny Strolla?
there's always that thought process.
This is me talking as a
but
fan.
That's not to say that people in his own crew didn't want to take his place,
Maybe.
right? So there's so many different theories out there, and we will get to those theories of why Joey Naples was killed. That'll be coming to a book near you, and then an episode. So
Again, another whole 20 books of just one thing. It's crazy.
And Johnny will tell you.
I wanted to visit there
it's
too.
like a rabbit hole.
It is.
It's a rabbit hole that you go down, and you have to pull yourself back sometimes because you just get so bombarded with information that it becomes hard to process it.
Let me ask you a question. Everything that we hear in Crooked City as a fan, if I tell people everything they could take as true life, you guys are saying we're for the most part.
Well, you have to keep in mind, Crooked City is told from many different voices.
Right.
And each person has a little bit of a different story on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say that, every single part and every single thing there is perfectly true. It's what that person believes or what that person's story is.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing in our research.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at these, let's say an FBI file. FBI files, they talk to 9 different informants in this one file. 8 of these informants have their own version of the events. Right. So you talk to any number of people, different people have different versions of different events, right? So that's might be what that person believes or that person remembers, and another person might remember it differently. If you remember the episode with the Laguna Niguel heist, you've got Emil Denzio and Phil Christopher on the same heist, and they at one point their stories diverge. Right. And of course, when you ask me who I believe in that situation, I'm gonna have to say the guy inside the vault. But if you want to know more about that, listen to those episodes.
Yeah. But I hope one day I can meet him.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy like that all these people are becoming? I think that this is history. Can't glamorize. We didn't choose this to happen in our history, right? Let
me ask you a question, Yvette.
Sure.
So, Jim and I, we meet these folks for research purposes. We're going to them to gain more information, to gain more knowledge. There's a large contingency of our listeners, of our viewers, of our people that subscribe, who are, as you call yourself, a fan, right? So let me ask you, what is it? Where does that fandom come from? In your opinion, what do you think?
The sensationalism of the story.
Pardon the interruption. Alexander Barrett, please report to room 213. Alexander Barrett,
say that exact
please
line
report
again.
to room 213. Thank you.
The sensationalism of the story. Wait, we'll say it again. Ask me the question again.
Where does that fandom come from? Do you think? Where does that fandom come from?
I think it comes from the fact that this is real events and that it touches me on a level because I'm from this area and I grew up and I've seen the aftermath. And that's kind of hitting me. It's like, okay, well, now I know. Like when I go back and think, okay, the streets have always kind of looked like this to me.
Mhm.
But now I kind of understand why. And I feel like in this age, like we're all looking for entertainment, right? And
Yeah.
it's so easy to find. You can scroll through so many things, you can find some a million streaming things, but you can't make up real life. You can't make up what your real history is.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. And that's why it means so much to me because it's my history. It feels like it's my history. It's my parents' history. I grew up here, so it means something to me. And it's unbelievable that you can have the chance to go to these places, like go to the app too. I think that also plays a part to it, to not only hear it, but to be able to go there, see there, listen to the stories, meet the people.
That's great. That's great to hear. I'll be honest. It's so much more than just like the sensationalism of it, right? And there's that too. A lot of people, for them, that is where they are fans because they'll watch Goodfellas, and the sensationalism of Goodfellas has you rooting for Henry Hill, who's really just a rat and an associate, an accomplice in murders and everything. A guy you would not, a cokehead at the end of the movie, a guy you would not really want to meet in real life.
Right.
But all of a sudden, the sensationalism of the movie, Martin Scorsese is a great filmmaker, and as a filmmaker, that's the danger. That's the danger, is only making that side of it, right? And no matter what you do, I don't care. And this goes for not just movies, this goes for music, especially in hip hop and everything else. There's the glorification of the culture.
Right.
And in the movie, they try to show you, like Martin Scorsese tried to show the audience that by the end of that movie, you don't want to be Henry Hill.
Right.
In that coked out, paranoid, mind frame, you turn on all your friends, you become a rat, you become everything else. You don't really want to become Henry Hill. But just like the movie Scarface or whatever,
Right.
most people as viewers ignore those lessons and they just kind of idolize these guys, and it becomes, this idolization of the lifestyle and of everything else, and they forget the lesson of the movie, right? So it's a tricky line. As a filmmaker, no matter what you do, there are going to be people who just take the glamorization of it and run with it. Same
Right.
thing with podcasting, with Crooked City, or with any of these other stories. There's gonna be that contingent of audience out there. There's always going to be, as we did the Emil Denzio show, there's always going to be a large subgenre fans who love heist movies, who love bank robbery
Right.
movies.
They may not be even so much interested in the mob. They're more interested in, like you say, like a bank heist or some type of
And what is it about that makes us as human beings drawn to that? There's so many movies about hitmen and about bank robbers, about these things that most people in their life, the majority of Americans in their life, will have never met a hitman or a bank robber or anything. And I'll tell you, we hang out with them now on a weekly basis.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, so it's whether we're going to the prisons and we're talking to these guys, convicted killers who've been in prison for decades.
And you've done quite a bit of that with Baccio and Ferrara, and
That's crazy.
I what I think it is, Johnny. I think part of it is, people love these shows and they love The Godfather and The Goodfellas and they love these things because I think they kind of vicariously live through that, that movie that they're watching or whatever they're watching at that point. And they kind of put themselves in that position. What would it be like if I was that guy, man? To be able to pull off, that type of a bank job or, to be that kind of a hitman or, to be like that in the mob or whatever. I think that's kind of what draws them in. It allows you to go into, use your imagination and kind of take yourself into that fantasy land of what would it be like if that was me.
Because it's like you see these things in movies, and to know that, okay, well that's your uncle. Like, it's not just a character you see in a movie.
Right.
Not all of us humans, like, I'm never going to be mob boss. You know what I mean? Not all of us are meant to be like that. But the fact that was your uncle, like, that was his life. Like, he built that. No matter how you get your power, right? You're still powerful.
Right.
I just think that's crazy. So that's why these people are big, because they are powerful.
Right.
And Yvette, I liked what you said too about, it's our history.
Mhm.
And it's for us as we learn more and as we discover more of these stories and everything else. That's when you put it in your mind and say, wow, that happened right down the street. That happened, not just in Youngstown. It happened in the suburb over here. It happened. This person got shot here in Canfield. This thing happened in Boardman. This guy was, whacked in Austintown. This guy, it's all of the Mahoning Valley. It's everywhere you go around here. The history of it, the blood on the streets in Youngstown, the history of the mob violence that's happened here, and just the mob wars and the mob gangsters and all that. It's our history. And so that does make it a little more, interesting to folks from around here. And so I kind of give people a pass when they seem to be, gung ho and just glamorizing all of the, all of the, maybe the negative aspects of it. Right. But as long as you come away with it and say, wow, that was historical. That was something that can be learned from. It could be, it really happened, and it really happened here. There's historical value there, and that's kind of why I think we got to keep going with what we're doing. And any of the naysayers and the haters, brush them off and keep moving forward, because we welcome people like you, Yvette, that come on and you want to talk about Youngstown Mob Talk. You want to talk about Youngstown history. This is the place to do it.
And it's just benefiting Youngstown, because it's just bringing. I think it's bringing positive attention to Youngstown, because it's changing like Youngstown is huge in these stories, and I think they should be talked about more. Like Donald Trump. I don't know. I think Jim trafficking. You know what I mean? And that's just like
There's
right
lessons
here
to be learned. Yeah.
I just think it's amazing. So I'm all in.
And I look at it this way: if you're from the Valley, and whether you've lived here all your life or you were born here and then you left after school and maybe haven't come back, or you moved here and stayed here, you're connected to all of this.
Yeah, you
really are. And like I say, it's part of our history. It's a piece of history that we can't forget. It's part of our history we can't forget, because, look at it now. We got corrupt officials everywhere, okay? Why do you think Youngstown survived the way it did for so long? Because without the cooperation of the gangsters and the judges and the politicians and the corrupt public officials, that could have never survived as long as it did.
Yeah.
Okay? And the thing is, we still have a lot of corrupt politicians and those type of things still in this area. The only difference is we don't have those made guys keeping them in check.
There you go.
Thank you guys so much for what you're doing here. I just want to say that, like, for me, I just recently lost my mom. That's sad, but it's something like, if you want to dive into something, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a big reader. I'm enjoying it. I've been listening. I'm an auditory learner, so it's really listening in a podcast, whatever way you want to learn. Like they said, there's videos, there's reading, there's lots of ways to learn.
Well, thank you, Yvette, for joining us. I'm sure, listen, if you'll come on, you'll be a part of Youngstown Mob Talk in the future. We'd love to have you as like a correspondent. When we launch this app, have you coming out there to check out those spots, all the mob tour spots. So if you haven't seen the last of Yvette with Youngstown Mob Talk, tell the folks at home, where can they find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on YouTube at Bougie Sports. I also have a website at bougiesports.com. And at my website, I'm going to link their website. So you can find them from my website as well. And
what about social media?
Social media. I am on all social media. You can find me on Facebook at Yvette Laboy, and at Instagram, and on X at Yvette M. Laboy.
X, that's yes. Twitter for us laymen, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Formerly the artist.
Formerly known.
It's the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, it's called X. Yeah. So
Thank
cool.
you.
Yeah, find her, Yvette, and definitely share the stuff, guys. And thank you guys. This has been another edition of Youngstown Mob Talk. Another a very spirited edition.
Yes.
You bring a lot of energy. Sometimes Jim and I might be dragging a little bit. So thanks for joining us. And for Yvette Laboy and my partner in true crime, Jimmy Naples. Of course, find us on Gmail, Steel Valley Syndicate. You can send us an email if you want to reach out to us. But I'm Johnny Chechitelli. Thanks for watching, or thanks for listening.
That was an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like and subscribe buttons and share it with your friends. It goes a long way in helping us produce more amazing content.